So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and then, yeah, we have a gentleman.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ivan. I have one short question, maybe both for Mr. Alex and Mr. Steven. Do you think there is such a thing as two free market, and if there it is, where do we draw a line? Thank you.
I'll just jump in quickly and say one of the things that I take from that is what I find interesting about the question, is the market too free, is that quite often it comes from a very rational basis of fear, which is that when people accuse the free market of being too free, they are fundamentally afraid that it will impact their jobs, it will impact their lifestyle, it will impact things that are out of their control. And I think what we should really be looking at instead are mechanisms that protect consumers. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily we need to over-regulate things, because there are in fact market solutions to protecting consumers by creating good behavior, for example. There's this nice emerging school of economic thought called the behavioral economists, who, it's kind of controversial in classical liberal circles, but I think in many ways it vindicates the arguments of economic liberalism. And part of what they talk about is how you create alternative incentives, that it's not just the profit incentive that drives people's consumer behaviors, but also that there are other means of creating incentive for good behavior. There's a very good book called Nudge, which addresses this entirely and talks about how even just by the order in which you put things on the shelf in a supermarket can impact consumer behavior to protect them. If you, for example, put healthier goods at eye level, people are more likely to buy it than they are if you put junk food at eye level. But the question that has to be answered with all of this is who determines the degree of regulation? Who determines where and how far consumers need to be protected? So it's not necessarily that the market is too free, it's that we haven't put in the correct protection, to help.
Just a few points regarding this question. It's an important question. It raises also one more, I would say, misunderstanding about what happened, for example, in the financial crisis of 2008. A popular myth is that these greedy bankers made a mess of things. I'm not advocating or defending bankers per se, but that the banks and the financial system itself was at fault for creating this mess, when in fact the reality is that a lot of government interference, intervention, giving banks incentives to lend money in a very reckless way created this bubble and eventual disaster. So without the government's involvement, I think the banks would have been much more cautious in lending. And so the narrative goes on after the crisis that, we need more regulation, we need more government interference, when in fact part of the problem was that governments were giving banks bad incentives to lend money. Another thing that I wanted to say about the market and how we see the role of the government, it's more or less, if I could use the metaphor from sports, the government should be more or less an objective, impartial referee, watching what's happening in the marketplace, these competitors, and who are, obviously trying to gain advantage and in competing, but allowing them to play in a fair way and enforcing the rules. So if there's a penalty, this should be recognized, and there should be consequences, and vice versa. If someone is abiding by the rules, they should be left alone. But the government should not be an actual 12th player on the field, helping one side, giving out favors or subsidies or whatever to help one of the sides in the competition. So that's what we have in Croatia many times, where it's not a fair level playing field. And finally, regarding human behavior and incentives, there's an interesting case with France. One of the former presidents of France, a socialist, Francois Hollande, during his campaign, was trying to win over the majority and announced that he would resolve the economic problems by raising the highest marginal tax rate to 70%. That's what he in fact did in France by raising. We have a progressive tax system in Croatia as well. The government, one thing I can say on its behalf is it reduced the highest marginal rate from 40 to 36. And it was attacked, obviously, by many at the time. But in France, Hollande's solution was to raise the rate to 70%. And then the government would know best, in its wisdom, how to redistribute this money. And what happened in France? Many of the people earning the highest income simply left France. They left France, they moved to London, they moved many to the United States. So that's the reality, that many of the wealthiest, highest educated people don't necessarily need to stay where they're living. They don't have to stay in France. They can leave. They don't want the government taking 70% of their income. So revenues went down and Hollande failed. So in other words, we have to take into account human nature. We can't defy human nature and expect better results. And that's something our politicians do not understand. That many times if you decrease taxation, if you lower rates, in the end the government has even more revenue from taxation if you bring the rates down. Many economists in Croatia do not make this connection, still today. So it's again this way of thinking about the economy as a zero-sum game. You know, if I lower taxes, I'll lose all this revenue as finance minister. That's not how, economics works. And that's something that we really have to explain here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we have one more question. Okay, please.
My name is Lajan and I'm actually not a member of the Rome Society. However, I'm really pleased to be here and to hear the available inputs. And I made a couple of remarks and also have a few questions that I'm brief as possible. So I would like definitely to kind of agree that in family we experience freedom, but also we have to always found freedom with responsibility or accountability as such. So I would say we have to learn that from the early stage, and also in that sense, let's say build trust, because what we lack in Croatian environment is actually trust, that we have so many young people leaving, not just for studying, let's say for new experiences, but also like leaving for decades and maybe never will come back again. So for example, I have to also witness that I'm working abroad. But while working abroad and experiencing Brussels problem, not politically related in there, I'm still coming back to Croatia and living here at NGO, which is promoting Christian values, also promoting social enterprises. So in that sense, I really agree with you that Thomas Aquinas is really important for us, but also maybe in the sense of the care for common good as well. So I would say that while contributing to our families, let's say to develop, like while developing our businesses and promoting well, let's say in our circles, we have as Christians definitely even more to think about the society we live in such a way, not just serve for the profit, but also being prophets. I would say again, like the new fresh air of the Holy Spirit, or however you want to call it. And yes, and definitely which will lead us to building more resilient, not just the environment, but also new leaders as such, which will not follow one, like let's say, of two main parties or platforms in Croatia, and in such sense, we slate of them when it comes to the new jobs, new opportunities, new perspective. So yeah, so what I can do and justify is definitely invest in new generation, but always need to intergenerational dialogues, support. We have to think about the future and think about what we want to achieve. Thank you so much.
One of the authors I mentioned, Tocqueville, so that one of the great things that were making America was this willingness to associate for the common good, not going just to the government. In a free society, nothing obliges you to try to go to obtain material profit. The non-governmental sector continues to be as vibrant in the United States, perhaps not as some decades ago, but Acton Institute, and I belong in each organization that you're part. So from the moment that you are born, you are taught to contribute. That was not the case in my native country, Argentina, and in many parts of Europe. There was a great author 100 years ago, Jose Ortega Set, Spaniard. The book is called The Revolt of the Masses. And the 5th chapter is the worst problem that we are facing is the omnipotence of the state, because everyone began to rely on the state to work for the common good, to be prophets, and to now, just a short anecdote. My wife is North American. My kids were, I think, 6 and 8 or 5 and 7 years old, and there was an earthquake in Central America. And so the high school tells them if they can go fundraise, get money to help others. And my wife tells them, look, go around the neighborhood and I double whatever you get. Now they were 5 and 7, and they came with $200. I was asking, did they ask you if you could deduct it from taxes? It just becomes normal, and you have to recreate this. It's not the state, it is effort. To renew the culture has to start by each of you with your talents. Some might want to take care of the environment, others of the marginalized, others of immigrants, others of poor people. Again, nothing obliges you in a free economy just to search material profits. And as a fact, I think the United States is a case where which had, again, now a lot of government intervention, but maintains a free economy, has a very vibrant non-profit sector.
I think you talked also about responsibility and trust in your statement there. And I think what's interesting about that is it fits in with this idea of a voluntary society and so on. I mean, trust is not something that is built overnight. It's built with sacrifice. In order for you to build trust, just even between, say, for example, your partner or something, you have to sacrifice in your privacy in some ways. You share your life and so on with somebody, and that builds trust. The same is true of building communities. That in order to function in a society, you have to build community, and the community, in many ways, is the answer to your other issue, which was about breaking a kleptocracy, breaking this idea that everyone's beholden to two major parties and all the jobs come from there. If you start at the local level by creating communities, they will quite often step in and solve problems that the state can't fix. One of the best examples of this comes from South Africa, where the state education system was failing children. So what happened? Parents started setting up low-level private education. They cost maybe $1 a month or something because people were impoverished. It cost $1 a month. They shared resources. In their community, they created this alternative education structure that now surpasses the state institutions. the private education system in South Africa is far better than the state-funded education, and it is because of that community integration. And it broke the teachers' unions, who had a sort of stranglehold on the state. So effectively, by working on the local level, first with family, then community, you can start building up a stronger, more resilient society, and one that is more amenable to trust, basically.
Okay, just very briefly, you made some very important points in your comment. I would like to address just two things. First, the family and the importance of raising children in a healthy environment, and how freedom and nurturing someone's growth to become a responsible, virtuous person requires respecting authority. So freedom is not necessarily opposed to authority. Crushing, the institutions of society, including the family, attacks on the church, etc., attacks on any institution that has had authority in a society, leads to chaos. Doesn't empower people. It enslaves people. So there's this misunderstanding today, unfortunately, among many psychologists, professors who are teaching in departments of psychology, who misunderstand this, and so. It goes down to the basic level of raising children, where parents today are confused about their role. They have a natural authority over their children, and their children need to be obedient, and that will allow them actually to prosper later as human beings. It won't prevent them from doing that. So there's, I think, an important point there that needs to be explained in today's society, which is misunderstood, in many ways, the role of the family and parental authority. And there's parental authority. This has implications for public schools. These ideologues like to indoctrinate other children. They introduce things like gender theory very early in elementary education without the consent of parents. This is crazy. This is just complete madness. The other thing is regarding what you said about civil society and the work you're doing in an NGO. History over and over confirms that even one single person can make a difference. Marx had this view, this collectivist view, that there's institutions that are oppressing people, and that basically individuals don't matter at all. You can't change the course of history. We know where history is going, and it's futile to try to defy this or to do something in your own capacity. Well, the reality is the opposite. The reality is the opposite. No one was predicting that communism would suddenly collapse peacefully in most places in Europe. No one was expecting this. The intellectuals expected it to continue going on. So, we had the fortune of having a prophetic pope, a very strong moral leader in John Paul II, who almost on his own, as the leader of the church, helped bring down communism. So, this was part of his role in divine providence. And this is the reality, not just at the top, what we see above the surface, but underneath, below the surface, we have people on a daily basis making a difference. And, part of the reason we do events like this is to encourage every single person to understand that their life has meaning, they can make a difference. It's not just futile. We shouldn't just, lift up our hands and say, things will never change and we should just leave Croatia. That's not the answer.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So it's 3 minutes to 1. We will be having at 1 p.m. lunch, and then we'll have a break and we will reconvene here at 3 p.m. So once again, please a round of applause for our speakers, and thank you.